In the year 2239, space was no longer empty. Human colonies stretched across dozens of star systems. Cities floated in orbit above planets. Mining ships dug deep into asteroids. Massive fleets guarded the borders. But peace had never lasted long in human history. And now, the Human Federation stood on the edge of another war. The Krezzer Empire, a powerful alien race with sharp minds and sharp claws, had been watching humanity for years. They had built their own fleets in secret, gathering ships faster than the Federation could count. No one knew when the Krezzer would strike, but everyone knew they would. It was only a matter of time. Inside the Federation's high command on Earth, leaders sat around a large table. Their faces were tight with worry. Screens on the walls showed the latest reports. The Krezzer fleet had doubled in size in just 1 year. Border stations were already reporting missing ships. Scouts had gone silent near the neutral zone. Admiral Rhodes, an older man with silver hair and deep lines on his face, stood up. He tapped the table to get everyone's attention. "There's something they don't know about us," he said in a low voice. The room fell silent. "We built something," he continued. "Something they won't believe until they see it." The other leaders looked at each other. Some nodded. Others looked afraid. They all knew what Rhodes was talking about. Titanus, a warship the size of a floating city, hidden in a classified shipyard far beyond the outer colonies. Designed in secret for over 20 years. It carried weapons so powerful they had been banned by every known race in the galaxy. Plasma beams that could slice through planets. Cannons that could fire from one side of a solar system to the other. Shields so strong, nothing had ever broken them in a test. Few had seen Titanus. Fewer believed it was real. But the time had come to show the galaxy that it was no myth. Admiral Rhodes opened a file on the table. One name stood at the top of the page. William Carter, Fleet Commander. Carter was no stranger to war. He had commanded battleships in the Serious conflict. He had led peace talks on the Titan border. He had earned the trust of his crew and the respect of his enemies. He was known for his calm voice, even in the worst moments. He was not the kind of man who fired first, but when he did, he never missed. The admiral turned to his officers. "Summon Carter," he ordered. "It's time." Hours later, Carter stood on the command deck of the High Command. He wore the dark gray uniform of a fleet commander. His face was sharp, his eyes steady. He listened without interrupting as Admiral Rhodes explained the mission. "The Krezzer are moving," Rhodes said. "Their fleet is almost ready to cross the neutral zone. We can't fight them ship by ship. We'd lose millions, maybe billions." Carter nodded slowly. "And you want me to stop them with fear?" Rhodes gave a heavy sigh. "We want you to stop them without blood." Carter knew what that meant. Show them Titanus. Let them see its power. Make them turn back without a single shot fired. A victory through fear alone. "And if they call our bluff?" Carter asked. "Then God help us all," Rhodes replied. Carter accepted the mission without another word. He knew what was at stake. He knew the risk. But he also knew one thing the Krezzer didn't. Titanus was no bluff. 3 days later, Carter stood on the bridge of Titanus itself. The ship was beyond anything he had ever seen. Walls of silver and black metal stretched in every direction. The hum of the engines felt like the heartbeat of a giant. The crew worked in silence, knowing the weight of the mission. As Titanus powered up and turned toward the neutral zone, Carter gave his first order. "Prepare the ship. We move at full speed." In that moment, the fate of humanity rested on one warship and one man's ability to control it. While Titanus moved through space with silent purpose, far on the other side of the neutral zone, the Krezzer Empire was already in motion. The Krezzer were not like humans. They were taller, their skin rough like armor. Their eyes were dark and cold, like deep wells with no bottom. They lived for conquest. Their empire stretched across hundreds of worlds, taken by force. And now, they had set their eyes on human space. At the center of their war fleet stood a ship named Vengeance. It was the pride of the Krezzer fleet. Black as night, long as a mountain range, it carried thousands of soldiers and the most feared admiral the Empire had ever known. Admiral Varric. Varric stood on the command platform, staring at the star map in front of him. His arms were crossed, his sharp claws tapping against the steel rail. His officers stood below him, waiting for his next order. None dared to speak first. Varek's face was hard, his jaw set. He had spent years planning this invasion. He knew the Human Federation was weak. They had too many councils, too many rules, too many talks of peace. Varek believed that humans had lost the will to fight. And when a race stops fighting, it starts dying. He pointed a claw at the edge of the map. The neutral zone, he said, his voice deep and rough. We cross it in 5 days. An officer raised his head. High Command warns that humans may have built something powerful. Varek's eyes narrowed. Titanus. The officer nodded slowly. Yes, Admiral. A superweapon, they say. But no one has seen it. Varek let out a low, sharp laugh. Stories to scare children. If it were real, they would have shown it by now. The officer hesitated, then asked, "And if it is real?" Varek leaned forward. His voice dropped to a whisper, but it carried across the silent room. "Then we take it and make it ours." He turned toward the fleet. Hundreds of ships floated in formation, their engines glowing. Warships, fighters, carriers, all ready for battle. "Send the signal," Varek ordered. "All ships move at once. Show the humans what real power looks like." The officer pressed a button. Across the fleet, alarms sounded. Engines roared to life. One by one, the Krezzer ships turned toward human space, forming a massive wave of destruction. But Varek was not done. He walked to the central console and opened a private channel to the Krezzer High Emperor. "My Emperor," Varek said, bowing his head slightly. The Emperor's face appeared on the screen. His voice was slow and heavy. "The fleet moves." "Yes, my Emperor," Varek replied. "And soon, the humans will fall." The Emperor's cold eyes narrowed. "Remember, Varek, this is not just conquest. This is history. Bring me their leaders. Bring me their cities. Leave no doubt that the Krezzer Empire rules the stars." Varek bowed again. "It will be done." The screen went dark. Varek turned to his officers. "Prepare for battle. We will crush their spirit before we crush their worlds." As the fleet moved closer to the neutral zone, Varek stood at the front of his ship, staring into the endless dark. He thought of the human commander who would surely come to stop him. He thought of Carter, though they had never met. And in his mind, Varek had already won. Little did he know, Carter was already on his way, bringing with him the one thing Varek could not understand. A warship so powerful that even the bravest enemy might choose surrender over battle. The neutral zone had no borders, no lines, no woods. It was a wide stretch of empty space between human and Krezzer territory. It had existed for 50 years. Both sides had agreed never to cross it. But that agreement was about to be broken. Titanus moved toward the center of the neutral zone at full speed. It traveled alone, yet its presence felt heavier than an entire fleet. Inside, the crew worked with quiet focus. Every man and woman on board knew what this mission meant. If they failed, there would be no one left to send after them. Commander William Carter stood on the bridge, looking at the long-range scans. The Krezzer fleet had entered the zone. Hundreds of ships, more than he had expected. They looked like a dark cloud moving toward him, blocking the stars behind them. He felt the weight in his chest, but his face stayed calm. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a channel," Carter ordered. "To Admiral Varek. Let's see if he's ready to listen." The officer worked quickly. Static filled the air for a moment, then cleared. A cold, deep voice answered. "This is Admiral Varek of the Krezzer Empire." "Speak." Carter stepped forward. "This is Commander William Carter of the Human Federation. Admiral, turn your fleet around. Cross this line, and you will not return home." A pause. Then laughter. Varek's face appeared on the large front screen. His dark eyes studied Carter. His mouth curled into a grin. "So, the humans sent one ship?" Varek said, "Do you expect me to be afraid?" Carter didn't blink. "I expect you to understand what's coming." Varek leaned forward. "I see no fleet, no army. I see a single ship and a scared man behind it." Carter kept his voice steady. "This ship carries weapons your mind can't imagine. One shot could erase your fleet. Do not test me, Varek." The Krezer Admiral leaned back in his chair. "Show me," he said, "or move aside." The screen went dark. The crew on Titanus looked to Carter, waiting for his response. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Hale, stepped forward. "Sir, we can't hold this line forever," she said. "What's the next move?" Carter stood in silence for a moment. Then he gave his order. "Prepare the plasma cannon. Lock it on the empty moon in Sector 4. The crew obeyed. Lights on the bridge turned red. Warning alarms sounded across the ship. Deep in the heart of Titanus, the plasma core hummed louder. The ship's most powerful weapon, never used in real battle, was coming to life. Carter watched the moon appear on the screen. It was small, gray, and lifeless. A lonely rock floating in space. "Target locked, sir," Hale reported. Carter took a deep breath. His hand hovered over the firing control. He knew this shot was not meant to kill. It was a message, a warning. "Fire," Carter ordered. Titanus shook as the plasma cannon released its energy. A bright beam shot through space. In seconds, the moon exploded into dust and fire, breaking apart like glass under a hammer. The Krezer fleet stopped moving. Carter knew they had seen it. He opened the channel again. "You see what Titanus can do?" Carter said firmly. "Turn back now." But there was no reply. Carter stared at the screen. He knew Varek was still watching. He knew the Krezer Admiral was thinking, weighing his pride against the risk. The crew waited in tense silence. Still, no answer came. Carter turned to Hale. "Hold position. We wait." Outside, the broken remains of the moon floated through space. The Krezer fleet stood still, like a wall frozen in time. The neutral zone had become a battlefield without a shot fired between them. Carter knew the real battle had just begun. The destruction of the moon sent waves of fear across the galaxy. Ships along the Human Federation's borders picked up the energy reading. Civilian colonies received the news within hours. The plasma beam had cut the moon apart like it was made of paper. Images of the explosion spread across every channel. People watched in silence. Some cheered. Some held their breath in fear. But no one felt the pressure more than the crew of Titanus. Commander Carter stood on the bridge, watching the Krezer fleet on the screen. They had stopped moving, but they hadn't turned back. Carter knew they were thinking. He knew Varek was still there, deciding what to do next. The crew waited for another message, but none came. "Sir, they aren't leaving." Carter nodded. He could feel the tension building. The crew had seen what Titanus could do. They had fired the most powerful weapon ever made. Yet the enemy still stood in place. It was clear now, Varek was testing him. Testing how far Carter was willing to go. Carter pressed his hand to the table. "Open a direct line to Varek." The communications officer worked fast. After a short pause, Varek's face appeared again. His expression had changed. There was no grin this time. His jaw was tight, and his claws tapped the arm of his chair. "You've made your point, human," Varek said coldly. "My point is simple," Carter replied. "I can destroy your entire fleet before you reach human space." Varek leaned forward. "And you would kill us all without a fight?" Carter's voice stayed firm. "If you cross this line, I will do what I must." Varek's eyes narrowed. "You don't have the stomach for this." Carter didn't flinch. "Test me, and you'll find out." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The air felt heavy on the bridge. Carter knew the crew was listening to every word. Varek sat back in his chair. "What do you want, human?" Carter took a step closer to the screen. "I want peace. I want your fleet to turn around. Go back to Krezer space. Call off this invasion." Varek let out a low growl. "You asked me to run? I give you a choice," Carter replied. "Run or burn." Varek's face twisted with anger. His pride burned in his eyes. But Carter could see something else. Doubt. Fear. Varek was not sure anymore. Varek cut the channel without a word. Carter stood tall, though his heart pounded in his chest. He turned to Hale. "Hold position. Power down weapons, but keep them ready." "Yes, sir," she replied. Hours passed. The two fleets remained locked in place. The Krezer ships moved slightly, but they stayed just outside firing range. Titanus held the line alone. In the crew's eyes, Carter could see the questions they were too afraid to ask. Would they have to fire again? Would they really destroy an entire fleet? Carter knew what they were thinking because he was thinking it too. He hated the idea. Every life lost in battle was a failure in his eyes. But if he didn't stand firm, all of humanity would pay the price. He had made his warning clear. Now it was Varek's move. The bridge lights dimmed as Titanus continued to float between two great forces. The crew worked quietly, checking systems, watching the enemy. Carter stood alone, staring at the frozen fleet ahead. He knew this silence would not last forever. He knew the real answer was coming. The next day began with silence. Titanus held its position in the heart of the neutral zone. Its engines hummed softly, ready to move at a moment's notice. Its weapons, fully charged, stood waiting. The Krezzer fleet still loomed ahead. Neither side had fired another shot since the moon's destruction. But tension hung in the air like a heavy fog. Commander Carter stood on the bridge, staring at the enemy's ships. His crew worked quietly behind him. Every second felt longer than the last. No one dared to break the silence. Lieutenant Hale finally spoke. "Sir, they're still holding. No sign of retreat. No sign of attack." Carter nodded slowly. He knew what this meant. Varek was forcing him to make the next move. The Krezzer Admiral was betting that Carter wouldn't risk another shot. Varek believed that humans, deep down, were too soft to finish what they started. Carter had one chance to prove him wrong, but without starting a war. He turned to his communications officer. "Open a broadcast. This time, to every ship in Varek's fleet." The officer blinked in surprise. "Sir? All of them?" "Yes," Carter said firmly. "Every captain, every soldier. I want them to hear me." The officer nodded and started working the controls. Carter stood tall, his voice steady as the channel opened. "This is Commander William Carter of Titanus," he began. His words echoed across the Krezzer fleet, reaching every bridge, every control room, every soldier waiting in fear or pride. "You have seen what this ship can do. You watched a moon turn to dust in seconds. If you cross this line, you will meet the same fate. Not one of your ships will survive." Carter paused, knowing thousands were listening. "But hear me now," he continued. "I don't want that. I don't want to see your fleet destroyed. I don't want to take lives that do not need to be taken." He walked toward the front of the bridge, standing before the great screen showing the enemy fleet. "I offer you this choice," he said. "Turn back. Go home. Tell your people you stood on the edge of death and chose to live. There is no shame in survival. There is no honor in wasting your lives for one man's pride." Carter let the words hang in the air for a moment. "This is your chance," he finished. "Take it." He ended the broadcast and turned to his crew. They watched him in silence. Some looked unsure. Some looked hopeful. All of them waited for the enemy's reply. But Varek did not respond. Not right away. Hours passed. Titanus stayed in place. The Krezzer fleet remained frozen. Carter paced the bridge slowly. He knew his words had reached every soldier in that fleet. He had planted a seed of doubt. He could only hope it would grow before Varek made his move. Later that night, another officer approached Carter. "Sir," the officer said quietly, "some of the smaller enemy ships, they're pulling back slightly." Carter's eyes narrowed. He walked to the screen. He saw it. A few ships, small ones, had drifted back a few meters. Barely enough to notice. But Carter noticed. "They heard me," Carter whispered to himself. Varek's fleet was cracking, even if just a little. The standoff held through the long, cold hours. Titanus stood alone, a single giant facing a storm. But Carter knew something had changed. The enemy had started to question. And that, he hoped, would make all the difference. Another day passed. The Krezzer fleet still floated in the dark, unmoving. But Carter had seen the small cracks. A few ships had shifted back. That small sign gave him hope, but hope was not enough. Varek still held his ground. The enemy commander had not answered Carter's last message. Carter knew the time had come to try again. He stood in front of the crew. His face was calm, but his voice carried the weight of the moment. "Prepare the last transmission," Carter said. "This time, I speak only to Varek." The crew obeyed. The channel opened. Varek's face appeared once again on the screen. His eyes were colder than before. His expression was tight with anger, but also something else. He looked tired. Carter spoke first. Your soldiers are starting to doubt you. Varric leaned forward, his voice low. They are loyal. Are they? Carter asked. Some of your ships are pulling back. You saw it. I saw it. They fear me more than they trust you. Varric slammed his fist on the arm of his chair. Fear is not victory. Carter nodded slowly. You're right. But survival is. Varric said nothing. Carter took a deep breath and stepped closer to the screen. This isn't weakness, Varric. You know what Titanus can do. You've seen it. You felt it. Your fleet won't stand a chance if I give the order. Carter's voice dropped to a whisper. But I don't want to give that order. Varric clenched his jaw. His claws dug into the metal armrests. His pride burned inside him like fire. He wanted to win. He wanted to conquer. But deep down, he knew Carter was right. He had seen the power of Titanus. He had heard the fear growing in his officers' voices. He knew his fleet was breaking. Still, Varric tried one last time to hold on to his pride. And if I turn back, what will they say of me? Carter looked him in the eye. They'll say you saved their lives. The silence hung between them like a knife. Varric sat back in his chair, staring at Carter. The anger in his eyes faded, little by little. His claws stopped moving. His breathing slowed. Then at last Varric spoke. Very well, he said quietly. We turn back. The crew of Titanus gasped softly, but Carter raised his hand to keep the bridge silent. Varric leaned forward one last time. But this is not over, human. One day, we will meet again. Carter nodded. Maybe, but not today. Varric ended the channel without another word. A moment later, the Krezzer fleet began to turn. One by one, the ships rotated in place and pulled away from the neutral zone. Hundreds of engines lit up the dark as the enemy fleet slowly drifted back toward their own space. Carter stood in silence, watching every ship leave. His crew waited, unsure if it was real. Then, Lieutenant Hale turned to him and spoke softly. Sir, they're gone. Carter let out a slow breath and finally nodded. Stand down all weapons. Power down the plasma core. The lights on the bridge shifted from red to soft white. The crew began to cheer. Some stood and hugged. Others leaned back in their chairs with tears in their eyes. They had faced the greatest threat in human history, and won without firing a single shot at the enemy fleet. Carter didn't celebrate. He walked to the front window, looking out into the endless dark. He knew this was only the beginning. The Krezzer would remember this day. They would rebuild. They would return one day. But not today, and not while Titanus stood ready. The bridge of Titanus was quiet now. The Krezzer fleet was gone. The danger had passed. But no one on board had left their stations yet. They stayed, watching the empty space ahead of them, as if expecting the enemy to return. Commander Carter stood in front of them all. He watched the last Krezzer ship vanish into the distance, leaving the neutral zone silent once again. Lieutenant Hale approached him carefully. It's over, sir, she said, her voice soft. Carter nodded. Yes, for now. He turned to the crew. They looked tired but proud. Men and women who had stood on the edge of the impossible and held their ground. Carter knew what they had done here today would be remembered for a long time. He stepped toward the center of the bridge and raised his voice so all could hear. You did well today, he began. You followed every order. You held your nerve. And because of that, no lives were lost. The crew listened in silence. Carter continued. Many people believe strength comes from firing the first shot, from showing your enemy how much damage you can do. But they are wrong. He paused, letting the silence carry the weight of his words. True strength comes from knowing when not to pull the trigger. We stood between two great forces today. We carried the power to destroy, but we used that power to stop war, not start it. Remember that. Carter let his words settle over them. He could see the understanding in their faces. They hadn't just won a battle. They had prevented a war. Set a course back to Federation space, Carter ordered. Let's take Titanus home. The crew moved quickly but calmly. The engines hummed back to life. The massive ship turned slowly, leaving the edge of the neutral zone behind. As they traveled through the stars, Carter walked alone to the observation deck. It was quiet there. The stars stretched endlessly across the glass window. He stood with his hands behind his back, thinking about all that had happened. He knew Varric had not been defeated. The Krezzer would remember. They would rebuild. One day, they might return with more ships, more weapons, and more hunger for conquest. But Carter also knew something else. They would remember Titanus. They would remember the day they stood on the edge of death and turned away. And that memory might hold them back longer than any weapon ever could. The ship continued its journey through the dark. Carter stayed at the window for a long time, watching the stars. He knew the future was uncertain. But tonight, he had done what many thought was impossible. He had won a war without firing a single shot at the enemy. And that was true victory.